We usually treat time as a symmetrical geometric dimension. On a graph, it appears as the parameter t, a smooth track that suggests reality can slide forward or backward with equal ease. Erwin Schrödinger's foundational equations for quantum probability rely on this specific geometric symmetry. In these models, the direction of the arrow is mathematically irrelevant. The formulas function perfectly whether they are run toward the future or the past. Paul Dirac utilized these same mathematical symmetries to successfully predict antimatter. In relativistic physics, this leads to the block universe model, where the past, present, and future exist simultaneously as a static four-dimensional manifold. This theoretical symmetry creates a problem. In macrophysical systems, we observe a strictly unidirectional reality. Heat dissipates and eggs scramble, yet the inverse never happens. The math allows for a rewind, but the physical world does not. The framework of Ontologia Hierarchical Emergence addresses this by removing the assumption that time was a pre-existing dimension. Instead of a container, the model focuses on how structure itself is built. Time, in this view, is the emergent, cumulative record of every structural difference that has been retained by the system. This reconstruction begins at E0, the state of maximum symmetry. There is no matter, no space, and no movement. It's a state of zero differentiation. A state of absolute nothingness is a logical limit rather than a stable physical condition. Because concepts like permanence or stability are themselves structural properties, a state with zero properties cannot maintain itself. It necessitates a shift toward a minimal structure. To achieve stable existence, four operations must activate: distinction, composition, retention, and non-exclusion. Distinction identifies differences. Composition links them. Retention prevents them from vanishing. Non-exclusion keeps compatible configurations available. Together, these form the baseline for coherent reality. These four primitives act as the bedrock. Any system that satisfies these four rules will, by logical necessity, begin to generate the foundations of physics. When you have two distinct modes that must coexist and stay traceable, you are forced into a specific two-dimensional structure. This is the 1 plus I cell. Identity maps to the real axis, and difference maps to the imaginary axis. Because the system must retain the difference while maintaining composition, these two axes cannot collapse into a single point. They must coexist as independent orthogonal modes. This creates a persistent non-coincidence between what the system is and how it differs from itself. This structural tension is called desphase, or mismatch. This mismatch is the birth of history. Because the system cannot resolve this tension into a single, static point, it possesses an active state that refuses to vanish. History here is defined by tension, not movement. It does not require physical space or particles. It is a logical requirement of maintaining a distinction over time. This structural logic precedes gravity, electromagnetism, or any physical force. It is the reason the universe possesses a state at all. The mismatch forces a continuous update. The system is always one step behind its own coherence, driven by a tension it can never fully resolve. Without this built-in structural mismatch, the universe would lack the drive to change. It would remain locked in the absolute stasis of E0. Simply having a history of changes is not enough to create time as we know it. For a timeline to emerge, that history must be organized. This organization happens through cumulative retention.
As this graph shows, the system doesn't just change, it records those changes. Each node is a state, and the tethers are the permanent structural records of those mismatches. Each retained difference modifies the architecture of the entire system. It is a permanent addition that dictates how all future differences can be composed. This geometric recording process creates an ordered sequence of dependencies. We interpret the sequence, this growing stack of structural updates, as the flow of time. Since structural capacity is finite, every system has a budget for how much history it can process and retain. A system with high retention capacity builds a denser, more complex internal record. This density manifests as a slower relative temporal progression compared to systems with less capacity. Low retention systems, by contrast, cannot sustain long-term dependencies. They undergo abrupt transformations and possess a scattered history that lacks a deep, cumulative structure. Time is the geometry of this accumulation. It is the physical evidence of a system's specifically retained history. If time is just a structural graph, why can't we simply move backward along its paths? Why are the equations reversible, but the reality is not? Tracing a path backward requires the total erasure of every single structural trace accumulated since that past moment. As this network shows, the new struts built by the system physically block it from returning to a previous state. This is governed by the primitive of non-exclusion. Once a possibility has been realized and retained, it becomes a part of the universe's consistency. Deleting a realized state without a balancing compensatory cost would violate the logical closure of the system. The universe is forbidden from unrealizing what has already been integrated. A configuration that has been fully composed and retained cannot be arbitrarily deleted. It is a permanent part of the structural budget. These realized states are rigid barriers. They prevent the system from ever closing back into an identical previous loop. Time's arrow is irreversible because the logic of reality does not allow a system to unwrite the structural traces of its own existence. In traditional physics, entropy is seen as the gradual loss of order and the destruction of information. In this model, entropy is redefined. Older nodes aren't destroyed, they're locked. The pathways to reach them are used up by newer structures. The universe's foundational information is never erased. Past states still exist, but their connection to the active present is severed. As the network grows denser, the structural budget is consumed by new active connections. Older nodes become operatively inaccessible. They are part of the scaffold, but cannot participate in new compositions. This geometric stranding of past states is what we observe as entropy. We aren't measuring the loss of information, but the loss of our ability to reach it through the current architecture. The past is buried under the undeletable architecture of the universe's own progression. Time is not a dimension we move through. It is an effect of the universe's inability to forget. Reality is an additive process. Every mismatch is resolved by creating a new layer of structure, building an irreversible scaffold block by block. What we perceive as forward momentum is actually the pressure of new structures being forced onto this rigid geometric history. Our experience of time passing is the cognitive recognition of this unyielding growth. Time is the consequence of a reality that must hold on to its differences to maintain its existence.